Uh, all pheasants come from China, all of them, regardless of where they are in the world today. That is their origins. Um, Back when Roman days and all that kind of thing, they were kind of like brought along, and then they brought through Europe as countries got conquered and all this kind of thing and spread. They brought this bird along and released them in these areas. Eventually, they got over to England and sort of tried to establish population there. But during this process of bringing them from China over through the European countries and up into England, there was no airlines. It was all, horse and buggy kind of stuff. So you bred things as you went along and did it, and you bred it. You weren't getting direct genetics from the wild anymore. It was each generation down the road. And they didn't really necessarily have incubators, which I want to get into that subject too, because there was a lot of different ways of incubating, but natural incubation is the best, and a pheasant isn't in captivity, really doesn't do a real good job on that. Plus, you don't have the production you want that way either, but setting them underneath setting hens, from domestic chickens, especially the phantom, you get excellent hatches. There's no question about it. And less deformities and less problems. You get a higher percentage. We'll get into all of that in details on incubation. But anyways, by the time they got to England, they were, I don't know, their population is still in a struggle. I don't know if they really have a wild population there anymore, but those type that they referred to as a blackneck, it was a combination of crossing from all of these different subspecies of the ringneck, and then when they came up with this bird who was referred to as a blackneck, it had no ring. These were brought over to the United States here during the George Washington time and struggled. They didn't really take. So I don't know what the original strain is, but in my experience of trapping some birds or have hunted some of these birds, the strain that is in Michigan at the time was a Chinese ringneck, and sometimes as dark and sometimes a little larger than the regular Chinese, and the Mongolian ringneck. So I'm assuming, based on that, that the time it was introduced to Michigan and they did establish themselves were a combination of those two in a way. Because you can actually find one, and the brow ridges on a Chinese is light, and where it is very dark on the Mongolian. The Mongolian will also have a yellower eye, and the Chinese will have a brown eye. However, since they crossed, and it's practically the same thing, just coming from different areas, don't call me right now. You can, later. You can find Chinese pheasants that are the Chinese size with the yellow eye, and vice versa. So and then as you get farther west, into our western states, you get more Chinese type. It seems to be a trend because as the country was developed, time went by and there was different strains probably being used. So that's what I have on that right now. There is also this, in England, since they're struggling with them, came up with this idea of an English hunt. It sort of started out with, okay, they try to drive a woods and they flush the birds out and they fly relatively high off their roosting things, they tend to, and have guys waiting out there and then shoot at them. This kind of like took into what they do today is they have these buildings like towers, and they put the pheasants in the bottom, they raise them, and then they bring them to the top, and then they send them out to the chutes, and they simulate this type hunt, pep pep and all that kind of shit. But see, these birds don't have to be as strong flyers like the wild ones. When a bird is pure wild and it flushes, it uses a tremendous amount of energy, an outburst, and into its muscles and stuff to get off the ground, into a flight, and into the air. Like I'm saying, those genetics are lost. And in order to compensate and think you're really doing some hunting, they run them in these towers. So when they open the doors in the towers and send the birds out, they haven't wasted that huge burst of energy required to get off the ground. So they are able to fly fairly decently and get some speed going, and they're usually pretty high. And I mean, you'd hit them, it's sort of like, I guess you might consider it like duck hunting. But it was, and they do that here in the United States. They raise them and they put them in these towers. And as far as I'm concerned, it compensates us for this lack of being able to take off. This takeoff thing is vitally important for a bird in the wild, because if a fox is coming up to it or something, a coon, and I'm sure you can look at National Geographic or whatever, you can see a fox jump up and be able to catch something in the air just before it's gotten its momentum, or it ends up with a mouthful of tail feathers or something on that order. But that's another reason your captive red birds aren't going to survive. They can't get away quick enough. They don't have that. And that's through the process of raising them in captivity over generations. There is something referred to as a genetic drift towards this direction. And when you got some good stock, they're referred to as F1, first generation removed from the wild, F2, second generation removed from the wild. So that's another reason when you're releasing birds you expect them to survive in the wild, will not, because they've lost that genetic thing. I can explain how it starts, and I can explain how to reduce it, and I'll be doing that in the next video, because you have to pay attention to behavior, you have to pay attention to your bloodlines, where your sources are, and that in order to be successful to produce such a bird. Yes, it is a science. What I don't understand is why these biologists that go out there, these general guys, don't know the basics. It's just like, I often baffles the mind sometimes. And these guys are hired by the state, so I'm not going to get involved in that right now. So we'll see you in the next video right now. Let's see how this one works.